You know, I've spent most of my life watching people, really watching them. Not just their actions or their words, but the patterns beneath, the currents that move through them without their knowledge. And I've noticed something rather peculiar about certain individuals. They seem to move through life differently than the rest, not because they're special or chosen or blessed with some divine favor, but because they've learned something, or perhaps remembered something, something the rest of us forgot along the way. Most people you see, they're asleep, walking around in a kind of waking dream, going through the motions, following the script that society handed them without ever questioning whether it's actually theirs to follow. They get up, go to work, come home, watch television, go to sleep, and do it all over again. And they call this living. They call this a life. But it's not really living at all. It's a kind of mechanical existence, a performance of life rather than the actual experience of it. But then there are these others, these spiritually awake ones, as we might call them. Though I'm not entirely sure I like that term. It sounds too grand, too religious, too much like claiming some kind of superiority. But I don't have a better one, so it'll have to do. These people, they've woken up somehow, maybe through suffering, maybe through questioning, maybe through sheer accident. Doesn't really matter how. What matters is they see something the rest don't see. They feel something the rest don't feel. And because of this, they live differently. They move through the world with a different quality of attention. Now, I want to tell you about 12 habits these people practice. Not rules, mind you, not commandments or techniques or tricks, habits. Patterns of being that emerge naturally when you wake up to what's actually happening. When you stop living on autopilot and start paying attention to the deeper currents of existence. These aren't things you force yourself to do. They're things that happen when you start seeing clearly, when you stop being so identified with the role you're playing and remember there's something larger moving through you. The first habit is probably the strangest one, and it's this: they've learned to be comfortable with not knowing. Most people, you see, they need certainty. They need to have everything figured out. They need their beliefs firmly in place, their worldview solid and unshakable. They walk around pretending they understand things they don't actually understand at all. They have opinions about everything, strong opinions. They know what's right and what's wrong, what's true and what's false, what should be and what shouldn't be. And they defend these positions with tremendous energy because their whole sense of identity is built on them. But the awakened person, they've given up this game, not because they're lazy or indifferent or don't care about truth, but because they've realized something. They've realized that the universe is far more mysterious than any human mind can fully grasp, that life is infinitely complex, that every answer you arrive at immediately reveals 10 new questions. And instead of being frightened by this, instead of desperately grasping for solid ground, they've learned to be at peace with the mystery, to float in it, you might say, to swim in uncertainty without drowning in anxiety. I remember years ago, I was working with a patient who came to me absolutely convinced he had everything figured out. His political views, his religious beliefs, his understanding of psychology, all of it was perfectly organized in his mind. Every question had an answer. Every problem had a solution. He was like a man who had built himself a very tidy little mental house and locked all the doors and windows. And he came to me not because he wanted to open those doors, but because he wanted me to confirm that his house was the right house, the true house, the only house worth living in. But as we worked together, something started to happen. Little cracks appeared in the walls, questions he couldn't answer, contradictions he couldn't resolve. dreams that didn't fit his neat categories. And at first this terrified him. He fought against it, tried to patch the cracks, reinforce the walls, keep everything contained and certain. But eventually, slowly, something shifted. He began to see that the cracks weren't destroying him, they were letting light in. And gradually, very gradually, he learned to live with uncertainty, to not know, to hold questions without needing immediate answers. And you know what happened? He became more alive, more curious, more open, less defensive, less rigid. He could actually listen to people who disagreed with him without feeling threatened. He could change his mind without feeling like he was betraying himself. He could sit with a problem without needing to solve it right away. This is what I mean by being comfortable with not knowing. It's not ignorance, it's wisdom. It's recognizing the limits of what any individual consciousness can grasp while remaining open to learning, growing, evolving. The second habit follows naturally from the first. These awakened people, they've learned to observe their own minds, to watch their thoughts the way you might watch clouds passing across the sky. Most people are completely identified with their thinking. A thought appears in their head, and they immediately believe it, follow it, act on it. They don't distinguish between themselves and their thoughts. They are their thoughts. If they think, I'm a failure, they don't see this as a thought. They experience it as a fact about reality. But the awakened person has developed what we might call an observing consciousness. They can notice a thought arising without immediately becoming that thought. They can watch fear moving through their system without being consumed by it. They can feel anger without acting it out. They can experience desire without being controlled by it. There's a space, you see, between the stimulus and the response. And in that space lies freedom. This doesn't mean they don't have thoughts or emotions. Of course they do. They're human. But they've learned to have a different relationship with these inner experiences. Instead of being swept away by every mental and emotional current, they can observe the currents, notice them, feel them fully, and then choose how to respond, or sometimes choose not to respond at all. To simply let the experience move through and dissolve on its own. I've noticed this particularly with people who meditate regularly. Though you don't need to meditate to develop this capacity. You just need to start paying attention to your own mind. Really paying attention. Not analyzing it or judging it or trying to fix it. Just watching it with curiosity. Like you're a scientist observing an interesting phenomenon. What thoughts come up repeatedly? What triggers certain emotional reactions? What patterns keep playing out? When you start observing this way, something remarkable happens. The thoughts and emotions lose some of their power over you. They're still there, but they don't control you quite so completely anymore. The third habit is maybe the most difficult one. These people have learned to sit with discomfort, to not immediately reach for the escape hatch every time something unpleasant arises. Modern life, you see, is designed around avoiding discomfort. We have entertainment to distract us from boredom. We have alcohol and drugs to numb our pain. We have social media to escape our loneliness. We have shopping to fill our emptiness. We have endless strategies for not feeling what we're actually feeling. But the awakened person has learned to do something radical. They've learned to turn toward the discomfort instead of away from it. When anxiety arises, instead of immediately trying to make it go away, they feel it. They explore it. They get curious about it. Where is it in the body? What does it actually feel like? What is it trying to tell them? And this isn't masochism. It's not about enjoying suffering. It's about recognizing that discomfort is information. It's the psyche's way of communicating. And when you learn to listen to it, instead of constantly running from it, you discover something interesting. The discomfort doesn't actually destroy you. You can survive it. You can even learn from it. I had a colleague once who was terrified of being alone, absolutely terrified. She would fill every moment with activity, with people, with noise. Um, she couldn't stand silence, couldn't bear solitude. And for years she lived this way, constantly running from the feeling of aloneness. But then circumstances forced her to spend time by herself, a long recovery from an illness where visitors were limited. And she had no choice but to face what she'd been avoiding. And you know what she discovered? The thing she'd been running from her entire life wasn't actually as terrible as she'd imagined. Yes, it was uncomfortable. Yes, there was grief there, and sadness, and fear. But underneath all that, there was also something else. A kind of peace, a quietness, a sense of herself that she'd never accessed before because she'd been too busy running. This is what happens when you learn to sit with discomfort. You discover you're stronger than you thought, more resilient, more capable. And the things you've been avoiding, they lose their power. They're still uncomfortable, sure, but they're not monsters anymore. They're just experiences, passing weather in the landscape of consciousness. The fourth habit is related but slightly different. These spiritually awake people, they've learned to accept what is, not in a passive, defeated way, but in a clear-eyed, realistic way. They've stopped arguing with reality. Most of us spend enormous amounts of energy wishing things were different than they are. We think our partner should be different, our job should be different, our body should be different, our past should have been different. We're constantly at war with what's actually happening, insisting that reality should conform to our preferences. But the awakened person has learned something liberating. They've learned that arguing with reality is exhausting and pointless. What is, is. Your mother is who she is. Your childhood happened the way it happened. You're the age you are. Your body has the limitations it has. These are simply facts. And once you stop fighting these facts, once you accept them fully, something shifts. Not the facts themselves necessarily, but your relationship to them. And from that acceptance, from that clear seeing of what actually is, real change becomes possible. Not change motivated by rejection and hatred of what is, but change that emerges from understanding and acceptance. I think most people misunderstand what acceptance really means. They think it's this sort of resignation, this giving up, this laying down and letting life walk all over you. But that's not it at all. Acceptance is actually quite fierce. It's looking directly at what is, without flinching, without turning away, without softening the edges with fantasy or denial. It's saying, yes, this is what's here. This is the reality I'm standing in. And from that, yes, from that clear acknowledgement, you can actually begin to work with what's real instead of exhausting yourself fighting phantoms. I remember a man I worked with years ago who spent decades angry at his father, furious really. His father had been cold, distant, critical, and this man had built his entire adult life around proving his father wrong, showing him up, becoming successful enough that the old man would finally have to acknowledge him. But the father died, never gave that acknowledgement, never softened, and the man was left with all this rage and nowhere to put it. When he came to see me, he was still fighting, still arguing with a dead man, still insisting that his childhood should have been different. And I had to ask him, how's that working for you? This constant battle with something that happened 30 years ago? And he looked at me like I was suggesting he betray himself, like acceptance meant saying it was okay that his father treated him that way. But that's not what acceptance is. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It doesn't mean you think something was right or good. It just means you stop demanding that the past be different than it was. Because it can't be. It already happened. The only question is whether you're going to spend the rest of your life fighting with an unchangeable fact, or whether you're going to accept it and move forward from there. The fifth habit, and this one might surprise you, is that spiritually awake people have learned to embrace their shadow. Now, most people, when they hear about the shadow, they get nervous. They think I'm talking about becoming evil or indulging in darkness. But that's a complete misunderstanding. The shadow isn't evil. It's just the parts of yourself you've rejected, the qualities you decided were unacceptable, the impulses you've pushed down into the basement of your psyche. And here's the thing. Whatever you reject in yourself doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away just because you decide you don't like it. It goes underground. It becomes unconscious. And from there, it influences you in ways you don't even recognize. You see it everywhere except in yourself. You project it onto others. You become possessed by the very thing you're trying to avoid. I knew a woman once, very religious, very proper, who prided herself on being kind and gentle and never angry. She'd spent her whole life suppressing any hint of aggression, any flash of rage, pushed it all down, denied it completely, and you know what happened? She became one of the most passively aggressive people I've ever encountered. She would smile sweetly while saying the most cutting things. She'd agree to help and then somehow sabotage the effort. She'd never confront anyone directly, but she'd complain endlessly behind their backs. Her anger hadn't gone anywhere. It had just gone underground and was leaking out in these distorted ways. Because she couldn't acknowledge it in herself, it was controlling her completely. The awakened person has learned to do something different. They've learned to turn toward their shadow instead of away from it. They look at the parts of themselves they'd rather not see. The jealousy, the pettiness, the cruelty, the selfishness, all of it. And they don't do this to indulge these qualities, but to integrate them, to bring them into consciousness, where they can be understood and worked with. Because once you can see your shadow, once you can acknowledge it, it loses its power to control you unconsciously. You're no longer at the mercy of impulses you don't understand. You can make conscious choices about how to channel these energies. Think about anger for a moment. Most people either suppress it completely or express it destructively. But anger itself isn't the problem. Anger is just energy. It's passion. It's a capacity to say no, to set boundaries, to fight for what matters. The awakened person doesn't try to eliminate their anger. They learn to work with it consciously. They feel it fully, understand what it's protecting, and then channel it appropriately. Maybe into advocacy, maybe into creative work, maybe into clear, direct communication. The energy isn't destroyed, it's transformed. The sixth habit is related to this. These people have developed what I call psychological honesty. And I don't just mean they don't lie to others, though that's part of it. I mean they've stopped lying to themselves. They've stopped pretending they're something they're not. Stopped performing for an imaginary audience. Stopped maintaining this carefully constructed image of who they think they should be. Most people are living behind masks, you see. Multiple masks, actually, depending on the situation. The professional mask at work, the family mask at home, the social mask with friends. And they switch between these masks so automatically they don't even realize they're doing it. But the awakened person has started taking off the masks, not recklessly, not in a way that's harmful to others, but gradually, carefully, they've begun showing their actual face, their real thoughts, their genuine feelings, their authentic self. This is terrifying at first, Because when you stop performing, when you stop trying to be what you think others want you to be, some people won't like it. They've gotten comfortable with your mask. They've come to expect the performance. And when you show up as yourself, actually yourself, it disturbs them, makes them uncomfortable. Sometimes they'll try to put the mask back on you. Sometimes they'll leave. And that's painful. But here's what the awakened person has discovered. The relationships that survive this unmasking, the people who can handle your authenticity, those connections become deeper and more real than anything you had before. Because they're based on truth rather than performance, on actual seeing rather than projection. I think about a colleague of mine, brilliant man, spent his whole career playing a role, the distinguished professor, always had the right answer, the impressive insight, the authoritative opinion, never showed weakness, never admitted uncertainty. And it worked, in a way. He was respected, admired even. But he was also profoundly lonely, because nobody actually knew him. They knew the performance, the mask, the role. But the person underneath, the one with doubts and fears and vulnerabilities, that person was completely hidden. It wasn't until he had a breakdown, couldn't maintain the facade anymore, that things shifted. And in that breakdown, in that moment of complete authenticity, where he simply couldn't pretend anymore, he found something he'd been missing his whole life. Real connection. People who could see him, actually see him, and stay. The seventh habit is this. Spiritually awake, people have learned to sit with uncertainty. They've made peace with not knowing. And this might be one of the hardest things for modern people to accept, because we've been taught that certainty equals strength, that having all the answers is a sign of intelligence or competence. But the awakened person has discovered something different. They've discovered that the need for certainty is actually a kind of anxiety, a grasping, a refusal to accept the fundamental nature of existence, which is mysterious, unpredictable, ultimately unknowable. Most people can't tolerate not knowing. It makes them too anxious. So they grab onto beliefs, ideologies, explanations, anything that will give them the illusion of certainty. They become rigid in their opinions, defensive about their worldview, because to question it feels like falling into an abyss. But the awakened person has learned to live in the question. They can say, "I don't know," and not feel diminished by it. They can hold multiple perspectives without needing to collapse them into one final truth. They've developed what you might call negative capability, the ability to remain in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without irritably reaching after fact and reason. I've spent my entire professional life studying the human psyche, and you know what I've learned? The more I understand, the more I realize how much I don't understand. The psyche is vast, complex, paradoxical. Just when you think you've figured something out, it shows you another layer, another dimension you hadn't considered. And early in my career, this bothered me. I wanted to have it all mapped out, all explained, all certain. But over time, I've come to appreciate the mystery, to find a kind of peace in not knowing, because the need to know everything, to have it all figured out, that's just ego trying to feel safe and in control. But real wisdom, real spiritual maturity, that comes from accepting that you're living in a mystery that you'll never fully solve. And that's okay. That's actually quite beautiful if you can let yourself feel it. The eighth habit might sound contradictory after what I just said, but bear with me. These awakened people, they've learned to trust their inner knowing. Now, this isn't the same as being certain. It's different. It's a kind of intuitive sense that arises from deep within, not from the thinking mind, but from somewhere else. The body maybe, or the unconscious, or what some might call the soul. It's a knowing that doesn't come with logical explanations or rational justifications. It just is. And the awakened person has learned to listen to this inner voice, even when it contradicts what their rational mind is telling them, even when it goes against social expectations or conventional wisdom. Most people have learned to ignore this inner knowing. They've been taught that only rational thought matters, that feelings and intuitions are unreliable, that you should always have a logical reason for your choices. But the awakened person has discovered that there's a kind of intelligence that operates below the level of conscious thought, an intelligence that can perceive patterns and connections that the rational mind misses. And they've learned to trust it, to follow it, even when they can't explain it. I remember making a decision once that made no logical sense. I was offered a position, quite prestigious, good money, everything my rational mind said I should want. But something in me said no, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet but firm sense that this wasn't right, that it would take me away from something more important, even though I couldn't articulate what that something was. And I turned it down. People thought I was mad. Maybe I was. But looking back, I can see that decision led me exactly where I needed to go. If I'd taken that position, I would have missed other opportunities, other encounters, other experiences that shaped everything that came after. My inner knowing saw something my conscious mind couldn't, and I'm grateful I listened to it. The ninth habit, and this one is perhaps less obvious than the others, is that these people have developed what I call a capacity for solitude. Not loneliness, mind you. Solitude. There's a difference, quite a profound one actually. Loneliness is a kind of hunger, a painful absence of connection. But solitude is something else entirely. It's a chosen state, a deliberate withdrawal from the noise and demands of the social world so that you can hear yourself again, so that you can reconnect with that deeper part of yourself that gets drowned out in all the constant interaction and stimulation. Most people today, they're terrified of being alone, genuinely terrified. They fill every moment with noise, with activity, with other people's voices. The television is always on. The phone is always in hand. There's always something to check, something to respond to, something to consume. And why? Because when they're alone with themselves, when there's nothing to distract them, they encounter something uncomfortable. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's boredom, maybe it's just the uncomfortable truth of their own existence, their own mortality, their own unlived life staring back at them. So they run from it. They keep running. But the awakened person, they've learned to sit with that discomfort. They've learned that solitude isn't something to fear, but something to cultivate. Because it's in solitude that you actually meet yourself, not the social self, not the role you play for others, but the real you, the one underneath all the masks and performances. And this meeting, this encounter with yourself, it's essential. You can't become whole if you never spend time alone. You can't integrate your shadow if you're constantly distracted. You can't hear your inner voice if you never create silence for it to speak into. I've always needed solitude myself, long stretches of it, time to think, to feel, to process what I was encountering in my work and in my own inner life. My wife, she understood this about me. Not everyone did. Some people thought I was being antisocial or cold, but I wasn't running away from people. I was running toward something, toward myself, toward the unconscious, toward whatever truths were trying to emerge. And those periods of solitude, they were often the most productive, the most creative times of my life. Not in the sense of producing external results necessarily, but in the sense of inner development, inner growth. The 10th habit is closely related. These awakened individuals, they've learned to distinguish between their own thoughts and feelings and those that belong to others or to the collective. This might sound simple, but it's actually quite difficult. We are social creatures. We absorb things from our environment constantly, often without realizing it. The mood of a room, the anxiety of a culture, the beliefs of our family or community. And most people never question whether these thoughts and feelings are actually theirs, or whether they've simply internalized them from outside. I remember working with a patient once, a woman who was convinced she wanted to be a doctor. It was all she talked about. Her goal, her ambition, her identity even. But as we explored it more deeply, as we examined where this desire actually came from, we discovered it wasn't hers at all. It was her father's unfulfilled dream. He'd wanted to be a doctor, but circumstances prevented it, and he'd unconsciously transferred that desire onto her. She'd absorbed it so completely that she genuinely believed it was her own wish, but it wasn't. And once she realized this, once she could separate her father's dreams from her own actual desires, everything shifted. She felt lighter, freer. She ended up becoming a teacher instead, which is what she'd always secretly wanted but had never given herself permission to pursue. This happens all the time. People carry beliefs that aren't theirs, fears that belong to their parents or their culture, ambitions that society imposed on them, and they never question it. They just assume that whatever is in their head must be their own authentic thought. But the awakened person has learned to examine their inner life more carefully, to ask, is this really mine? Or did I pick this up somewhere? Is this my fear, or is it something I absorbed from my mother? Is this my belief, or is it just what everyone around me believes and I never questioned it? The 11th habit, and this one takes real courage, is that these people have learned to sacrifice. Not in the religious sense necessarily, though sometimes that's part of it, but sacrifice in the psychological sense. The willingness to let something die so that something new can be born. The willingness to give up what's familiar and comfortable for the sake of growth. The willingness to lose your old identity so that a new one can emerge. You see, transformation requires sacrifice, always. You cannot become something new while clinging to everything old. The caterpillar has to dissolve in the cocoon. The seed has to break apart in the soil. The old self has to die for the new self to be born. And most people, they understand this intellectually. They nod along when they hear it. But when it comes to actually doing it, actually letting go, actually allowing something to die, they can't. They hold on. They try to transform while keeping everything the same. And it doesn't work. It can't work. I've seen this in my own life repeatedly. Every major period of growth, every real transformation, it required me to sacrifice something. Sometimes it was a belief I'd held for years. Sometimes it was a relationship that had run its course. Sometimes it was an identity, a way of seeing myself that no longer fit who I was becoming. And letting go, it was painful every time. There was grief, there was fear, there was uncertainty about what would come next. But I learned that this discomfort, this pain of letting go, it's not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something is right. It's the pain of growth, of evolution, of becoming more than you were. The awakened person understands this. They don't avoid the sacrifice. They don't try to grow while keeping everything safe and unchanged. They lean into it. They accept that transformation requires loss. That becoming who you're meant to be means letting go of who you've been. And they do it, not recklessly, not without thought, but consciously, deliberately, understanding that this is the price of wholeness. The 12th habit, the final one I want to speak about, might be the most important of all. These spiritually awake individuals, they've developed what I call a relationship with something larger than themselves. Now, I'm being deliberately vague with that language because it means different things for different people. For some, it's God in the traditional religious sense. For others, it's nature. For others, it's the collective unconscious. For others, it's simply the mystery of existence itself. The specific form doesn't matter as much as the relationship itself. What I mean is this: the awakened person has moved beyond the prison of the ego. They've discovered that they are not just this small, separate self, this isolated individual struggling alone in a hostile universe. They've discovered that they're connected to something much larger, much older, much wiser than their conscious personality. And they've learned to listen to it, to dialogue with it, to receive guidance from it. This isn't about blind faith or surrendering your intelligence. It's about recognizing that the conscious mind, for all its brilliance, is just a small part of the total psyche. There are depths within you that your conscious mind can't access directly. There is wisdom in the unconscious that doesn't speak in words but in symbols, in dreams, in synchronicities, in intuitions. And the awakened person has learned to pay attention to these communications, to take them seriously, to integrate them into their conscious life. I spent decades working with dreams, my own dreams and the dreams of my patients. And what I discovered is that dreams are not just random noise from the brain. They are messages from the unconscious. They are attempts by the deeper self to communicate with the conscious ego, to compensate for its one-sidedness, to show it what it's missing, to guide it toward wholeness. But most people ignore their dreams. They wake up and forget them immediately, or they remember them but dismiss them as meaningless. And in doing so, they're cutting themselves off from an incredible source of wisdom and guidance. The awakened person doesn't make this mistake. They pay attention, they record their dreams, they reflect on them. They allow the images and symbols to work on them, not because they believe dreams can predict the future or give them lottery numbers, but because they understand that the unconscious is trying to help them, trying to show them something they need to see. And this relationship with the unconscious, this dialogue between the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche, it's essential for individuation. You can't become whole if half of yourself is ignored and rejected. But it goes beyond dreams. The awakened person also pays attention to what happens in the external world. Not just the obvious cause and effect relationships, but the meaningful coincidences, what I called synchronicities. Those moments when the outer world seems to mirror something happening in your inner world, when you think of someone and they call, when you need to hear a particular message and you randomly open a book to exactly that passage, when the universe seems to be speaking to you through the events of your life. Now, I'm not suggesting that everything is a sign or that you should read meaning into every little thing. That way lies paranoia and delusion. But there are moments, certain moments, when something in the outer world resonates so deeply with your inner state that you can't ignore it. It feels significant. It feels like more than coincidence. And the awakened person has learned to recognize these moments and to take them seriously, to ask, what is this trying to tell me? What am I being shown? This requires a particular kind of attention, a kind of listening, not just with your ears, but with your whole being. Most people move through life half asleep, completely absorbed in their thoughts and plans and worries. They don't notice what's actually happening around them. They don't notice the patterns, the synchronicities, the subtle ways that life is trying to guide them. But the awakened person has developed this capacity to notice, to pay attention, to be present to what is rather than lost in what was or what might be. And through this attention, through this relationship with something larger, they find a kind of guidance, not the kind that tells them exactly what to do at every moment, not a voice from the sky giving clear instructions, but a subtler kind of guidance, a sense of rightness or wrongness, a feeling of being on track or off track, an intuition about which direction to move in, and they learn to trust this, to follow it, even when it doesn't make logical sense, even when it contradicts their plans, even when other people don't understand. I think this is what people throughout history have meant when they talked about having faith, not believing in doctrines or accepting propositions without evidence, but trusting in this larger intelligence, this deeper wisdom, this something that seems to be guiding the process of life itself, and learning to align yourself with it rather than constantly fighting against it, learning to work with it rather than trying to control everything through willpower and conscious effort alone. These 12 habits, they're not rules to follow. They're not a prescription for success or happiness. They're simply what I've observed in people who have genuinely awakened, who have done the hard work of becoming conscious, who have faced their shadow and integrated it, who have individuated at least to some degree. And what's striking is how different these people are from what our culture tells us successful people should be like. They're not driven by ambition in the usual sense. They're not trying to climb ladders or accumulate status symbols or prove themselves to anyone. They're not hustling constantly, grinding themselves into exhaustion in pursuit of some future moment when they'll finally be enough. And yet, somehow, they seem to accomplish things, important things, things that matter, not because they're trying so hard, but almost in spite of not trying in that desperate way most people do. I remember a man I worked with years ago, a patient actually, who came to me because he felt like a failure. He was in his 40s, hadn't achieved what he thought he should have achieved by that age. No impressive title, no substantial wealth, no recognition in his field, and he was tormented by this, absolutely tormented. He'd compare himself to his colleagues, his friends from university, even strangers he'd read about in newspapers, and in every comparison he came up short. He'd failed, or so he believed. But as I got to know him, as we explored his life together, I began to see something he couldn't see. This man had integrity, real integrity, not the performative kind. He turned down promotions that would have required him to compromise his values. He'd left jobs that demanded he betray what he knew to be true. He'd chosen relationships based on genuine connection rather than social advantage. And yes, these choices had cost him. In worldly terms, he'd paid a price. But in terms of his soul, in terms of his actual development as a human being, he was far wealthier than the people he envied. The problem was he couldn't see it, because he was measuring himself by the wrong standards, by the collective standards, by what society says success looks like. And according to those standards, he was indeed failing. But according to the deeper standards, the ones that actually matter for psychological and spiritual development, he was succeeding. He was becoming himself, which is the only success that means anything in the end. This brings me to something I've noticed about awakened people. They've stopped trying to be successful in the conventional sense, not because they don't care about contributing or creating value or doing good work, but because they've realized that chasing conventional success is often a way of avoiding the real work, the inner work, the work of becoming conscious, of integrating the shadow, of individuating. You see, our culture is obsessed with external achievement, with visible markers of success, money, status, recognition, power. And there's nothing inherently wrong with any of these things. But when they become the primary goals, when we organize our entire lives around acquiring them, we're usually running from something, from our own emptiness maybe, from our fear of insignificance, from the terror of looking inward and seeing what's actually there. The awakened person has faced that terror. They've looked inward. They've seen the darkness, the pettiness, the capacity for cruelty and self-deception that exists in every human psyche. And instead of running from it, they've integrated it. They've made it conscious. And once you've done that work, once you've truly faced yourself, the whole game of external achievement loses its urgency. Not its value, necessarily, but its urgency. That desperate quality. Because you're no longer trying to fill an inner void with outer accomplishments. You're no longer trying to prove your worth through achievement. You're no longer running from yourself by staying busy and important and recognized. You found something more stable to stand on, your own ground, your own center. And from that place, whatever you do in the world comes from a different motivation entirely. I think this is why awakened people often seem so paradoxical to others. They work hard, but they're not driven in that frantic way. They care deeply about their work, but they're not attached to outcomes in the way most people are. They can fail at something and not be devastated. They can succeed at something and not become inflated. They have this quality of being fully engaged and yet somehow detached at the same time. It's not indifference, though it might look like that from the outside. It's more like they're playing a game while knowing it's a game. They're participating fully, giving everything they have, but they haven't forgotten that it's all temporary. That in the grand scheme of things, whatever happens in this particular lifetime is just one small movement in a much larger pattern. And this awareness, this perspective, it gives them a kind of freedom that most people never experience. Another thing I've observed, and this might sound strange, but awakened people tend to have a different relationship with time. Most of us are constantly living either in the past or the future. We're replaying old hurts, old failures, old glories, or we're anticipating future achievements, future happiness, future resolution of current problems. We're almost never actually here, in this moment, in this present reality. But the awakened person has learned something about time. They've learned that it's not quite what we think it is. That the past isn't really past and the future isn't really future. That there's only this eternal now, this present moment, in which everything is actually happening. And when you really understand this, when you feel it in your bones, your whole relationship with life changes. You stop postponing your life until some future moment when conditions will be better. You stop believing that you'll be happy when you achieve this goal or acquire that thing or become that version of yourself. You realize that if you can't find life in this moment, you won't find it in any moment. Because this moment is all there ever is. The future is just imagination. The past is just memory. But this, right now, this is real. And yet, paradoxically, when you're fully present to now, when you're not constantly escaping into past or future, you actually become more effective at dealing with practical matters. Because you're here, you're paying attention, you're responsive to what's actually happening rather than lost in your thoughts about what happened or might happen. You see opportunities that others miss. You notice details that others overlook. You respond to situations with a kind of spontaneity and appropriateness that comes from being fully present. I've also noticed that awakened people tend to have what I might call a different relationship with suffering. They don't avoid it in the way most people do. They don't run from pain or difficulty or challenge. Not because they're masochists or because they enjoy suffering, but because they've learned that suffering is often the doorway to transformation. That the things we're most desperate to avoid are often precisely what we most need to face. This doesn't mean they seek out suffering, or create unnecessary difficulties for themselves. That would be neurotic, not awakened. But when suffering comes, as it inevitably does in any human life, they don't resist it in that panicked way most of us do. They don't immediately try to escape it or numb it or blame someone for it. They turn toward it. They ask what it's trying to teach them. They look for the meaning in it. And this changes everything, because suffering that has meaning is bearable. It's suffering without meaning that destroys people. When you can find purpose in your pain, when you can see how it's serving your development, your growth, your individuation, then it becomes something different. Not pleasant, maybe. Not something you choose, but not meaningless either. Not just random cruelty inflicted by an indifferent universe. I think this is what the old myths and religions were trying to tell us, with all their stories of death and rebirth, of descent into the underworld, of the hero's journey through darkness. They were mapping the psychological territory, showing us that transformation requires going down before you can go up, that you have to die to your old self before a new self can emerge, that the treasure is always guarded by the dragon, which means you have to face what you most fear in order to claim what you most need. But we've lost this wisdom in our modern world. We think transformation should be easy, comfortable, convenient. We want to evolve without having to face anything difficult. We want to become enlightened without having to look at our shadow. We want the treasure without having to fight the dragon. And so we stay stuck, perpetually beginning self-help programs we never finish, reading books about transformation while remaining fundamentally unchanged, talking about growth while avoiding every opportunity for actual growth that life presents to us. The awakened person has stopped playing this game. They've accepted that real transformation is difficult, that it requires sacrifice, that you have to give up something, maybe many things, in order to become who you're meant to become. And they've made that sacrifice, not grudgingly, not resentfully, but willingly, because they've seen that what they're giving up, their neuroses and defenses and false identities, these things were never serving them anyway. They were prisons, pretending to be protection. And here's something else I've observed, something that might seem small, but I think is actually quite profound. Awakened people laugh differently. There's a quality to their laughter that's hard to describe. It's not the nervous laughter of someone trying to fit in or diffuse tension. It's not the mocking laughter of someone who needs to feel superior. It's not the bitter laughter of someone who's given up hope. It's something else, something freer, lighter, more genuine. I think it comes from having seen through the cosmic joke, from understanding that so much of what we take seriously is actually rather absurd. That we're all just consciousness playing at being separate individuals, pretending we don't know we're all the same thing. That we're taking this game of life so seriously when really it's all just a kind of divine play, a cosmic drama staged for no one's benefit because there's no one separate from the play itself to benefit from it. When you see this, really see it, you can't help but laugh. Not at people, not cruelly, but at the whole setup, at the beautiful absurdity of it all. And this laughter is healing. It's liberating. It reminds you not to take yourself too seriously, not to believe too completely in your own importance or your problems or your dramas. It gives you perspective, distance, the ability to see your life as if from above, as part of a larger pattern that's both utterly meaningful and utterly meaningless at the same time. I remember once sitting with a patient who was in tremendous psychological pain. Her life was falling apart. Everything she'd built, every identity she'd constructed, it was all crumbling. And she was devastated, absolutely devastated. But at one point, in the midst of her tears, she suddenly started laughing, just burst out laughing at the absurdity of it all. at how seriously she'd been taking everything, at how convinced she'd been that her particular story mattered so much. And in that moment of laughter, something shifted. The pain didn't disappear, but it became bearable, because she touched something larger than the pain, something that could hold the pain without being destroyed by it. This capacity to hold opposites, I think this might be the most important habit of all. The awakened person has learned to contain paradox, to be fully engaged and yet detached, to care deeply and yet not be attached, to know that life is both utterly meaningless and infinitely precious, to see that you're both insignificant and essential, both nothing and everything, both the wave and the ocean. Most people can't tolerate this kind of paradox. They need things to be one way or the other. Either life has meaning or it doesn't. Either you matter or you don't. Either there's a purpose to existence or there isn't. And so they choose one side and cling to it, defending it against the opposite, never realizing that truth lives in the tension between opposites, not in choosing one and rejecting the other. But the awakened person has developed this capacity to hold both, to live in the tension, to be comfortable with not knowing, with ambiguity, with mystery. And this gives them a kind of psychological flexibility that serves them well in navigating the complexities of actual human life, which is never simple, never black and white, always messy and contradictory and paradoxical. So they learn to live in that space, that uncomfortable middle ground where certainty dissolves and something truer emerges, where you can hold your beliefs lightly, where you can say, I think this is true, but I could be wrong, where you can change your mind without feeling like you've betrayed yourself, where you can see multiple perspectives without losing your own center. This brings me to something I've noticed about awakened people. They have this habit of periodically withdrawing, not permanently, not in some dramatic fashion, but regularly, cyclically. They pull back from the world, from people, from activity, and they just sit with themselves. Now, most people find this strange. They think there's something wrong with someone who wants to be alone. We live in a culture that worships constant connection, constant stimulation, constant engagement. To withdraw is seen as antisocial, depressive, abnormal. But I think this is backwards. The person who cannot be alone, who constantly needs others around them, who fills every moment with noise and distraction, this is the person we should worry about. Because they're running from something, running from themselves usually, from the silence where uncomfortable truths live, from the emptiness that must be faced before it can be filled with anything real. The awakened person understands that solitude is not loneliness, that being alone and being lonely are completely different things. You can be desperately lonely in a room full of people, and you can be deeply connected while sitting alone on a mountaintop. Because connection, real connection, doesn't depend on physical proximity, it depends on inner wholeness. When you're whole within yourself, you carry that wholeness everywhere. You don't need constant validation from others. You don't need continuous social contact to feel real. You exist fully whether anyone's watching or not. I remember someone once asked me why I spent so much time alone in my tower by the lake. They couldn't understand it. They thought I must be depressed or antisocial. But I tried to explain that those hours alone were the most nourishing part of my life. That's where I could hear myself think, where I could process everything I'd absorbed from patients, from the world, from my own unconscious, where I could integrate, digest, make sense of things. Without that time, I would have been overwhelmed, fragmented, lost in the chaos of too many impressions. The withdrawal wasn't escape, it was necessary work, the work of becoming whole, and I think this is true. For anyone who awakens, you need time away from the collective, time where you're not performing, not explaining yourself, not managing other people's reactions to you. Time where you can just be, without any audience, without any role to play. This is where you discover who you actually are, beneath all the masks and personas, where you find your own voice, instead of echoing everyone else's, where you learn to trust your own perceptions, instead of constantly checking them against consensus reality. But here's what's interesting. The more time you spend alone, really alone with yourself, the more you realize you're never actually alone. There's this whole inner world, populated with figures and voices and energies that are just as real as anything outside. Dreams come, memories surface, insights arise, the unconscious speaks, and you start to have this relationship with yourself, with the depths of your own being that's richer than most relationships you have with other people. Not better necessarily, just different, more fundamental somehow. And when you return to the world after these periods of withdrawal, you're different. You're more present, more real, more yourself. You have something to give because you've been filled up by that inner source. You're not depleting yourself, trying to get from others what you can only give to yourself. You're not performing or pretending or trying to be what people expect. You're just there, solid, real, whole. And people feel this. They might not understand it. They might even be a little unsettled by it, but they feel it. Another habit I've noticed, and this one's subtle, is that awakened people have learned to work with their energy rather than against it. They don't force themselves to be productive when they're exhausted. They don't push through when every cell in their body is saying stop. They've learned to read the natural rhythms of their own system and respect them. Now this sounds simple, but it's actually revolutionary in a culture that glorifies constant productivity, that treats the body like a machine that should perform the same way every day, every hour. We are taught to override our natural rhythms, to stay up late even when we're tired, to get up early even when we need more sleep, to work through illness, through exhaustion, through every signal the body sends that it needs rest. But the awakened person has learned that this approach is violence against yourself, that your body has wisdom, that fatigue is information, not weakness, that the need to rest is not laziness but biological necessity. They've stopped trying to force themselves into some arbitrary schedule that ignores their actual needs. Instead, they work with themselves. When they have energy, they use it. When they don't, they rest. Simple as that. Except it's not simple at all in practice, because everything in our culture fights against this natural rhythm. Your job demands you show up at the same time every day, regardless of how you feel. Your family expects you to be available regardless of your energy level. Society judges you if you're not constantly producing, constantly achieving, constantly moving forward. So to actually honor your own rhythms requires tremendous courage. It means saying no sometimes. It means disappointing people. It means being misunderstood, judged, criticized. But the awakened person has decided that their own well-being is worth that cost, that living in harmony with themselves is more important than living up to others' expectations. And something happens when you start respecting your own rhythms. You become more efficient, not less. When you work with your energy instead of against it, you accomplish more with less effort. The work you do when you're genuinely energized is worth 10 times the work you do when you're forcing yourself through exhaustion. Quality replaces quantity. Presence replaces performance. And you stop burning out, stop getting sick all the time, stop feeling like you're running on empty. I think maybe this is related to another habit, which is that awakened people have stopped trying to control outcomes. They've learned to put in effort without being attached to results, to work hard without needing things to turn out a particular way. This is incredibly difficult. Most of us have been taught that we should be able to control our lives, that if we just work hard enough, plan well enough, try hard enough, we can make things happen the way we want them to. But life doesn't work that way, does it? You can do everything right and still fail. You can make all the wrong choices and somehow succeed. There's this element of chance, of fate, of forces beyond our understanding that shape outcomes far more than our personal efforts do. The awakened person has made peace with this. They do what they can, they give their best effort, but they hold the results loosely. They understand that they're not in control of nearly as much as they think they are. That all they can really control is their own attitude, their own effort, their own response to whatever happens. Everything else is in the hands of life itself, of the unconscious, of God if you want to call it that. Some larger intelligence that's operating according to patterns we can barely perceive, let alone control. This doesn't make them passive. They still act, still try, still work toward goals. But there's a lightness to it, a kind of playfulness even. They're participating in life without being crushed by the weight of needing everything to work out a certain way. When things go well, they're grateful but not attached. When things go badly, they're disappointed but not destroyed. Because their sense of self, their peace, their worth, none of that depends on external outcomes. It comes from something deeper, something that can't be touched by success or failure. And maybe this is the final habit I'll mention. The awakened person has developed this capacity to find meaning in everything, not in some forced, artificial way, not by pretending that terrible things are actually good, but by seeing that every experience, pleasant or painful, contains something essential, some teaching, some gift, some necessary piece of your development. They've stopped dividing life into good experiences and bad experiences. Everything is just experience, raw material for growth, information about reality, opportunity to deepen, to learn, to become more whole. This doesn't mean they enjoy suffering. They're not masochists who seek out pain, but when pain comes, and it always does, they don't waste energy fighting against the fact of it. They don't spend years bitter and resentful about what happened to them. They feel it, they process it, they learn from it, and they integrate it into who they are. The suffering becomes part of their depth, their wisdom, their capacity to help others who suffer. Nothing is wasted. Everything serves. I think this might be what people mean when they talk about grace. This ability to receive life as it comes, all of it, the beautiful and the terrible, and find meaning in the whole mess. To say yes to existence even when existence is brutal. To remain open even when you've been hurt. To keep loving even after loss. To keep trying even after failure. To keep being yourself even when the world wants you to be someone else. Because in the end, I think that's what spiritual awakening really is. It's not about having mystical experiences or developing special powers or transcending your humanity. It's about becoming fully human, fully yourself, fully alive to all of it, the joy and the sorrow, the light and the dark, the meaning and the absurdity. It's about waking up to what's actually here instead of spending your whole life lost in fantasies about what should be here. It's about seeing clearly, feeling deeply, thinking honestly and living authentically. Simple things, really, but so rare, so difficult in practice, so easily lost in the noise and pressure and confusion of modern life. These habits I've described, they are not techniques you can master or steps you can follow. They are more like natural expressions of consciousness that's awake when you're truly present. These ways of being emerge spontaneously. You don't have to force them or remember to do them. They're just how you are when you're not caught in illusion, not trapped in fear, not performing for an audience that doesn't really exist. So maybe the question isn't, how do I develop these habits? Maybe the question is, what's preventing them from arising naturally? What am I holding on to that keeps me asleep? What am I afraid to see, to feel, to know? Because I think we're all capable of waking up. We're all capable of living this way. It's our natural state, actually. We're just so covered over with conditioning, so burdened with beliefs and fears and identities that we've forgotten how to simply be. But it's still there, underneath everything, waiting, always waiting for us to remember who we really are. And I suppose what I'm trying to say after all this is that these habits aren't really separate things at all. They are more like different facets of the same jewel, different angles on the same truth, which is that when you wake up, when you really wake up to what's actually happening, when you stop living in your head and start living in reality, everything changes. Not dramatically, maybe, not in some sudden flash, but quietly, steadily, your whole way of being shifts. You stop fighting so much, stop resisting what is, stop demanding that life be different than it actually is. And in that stopping, in that surrender, you find something you weren't even looking for, a kind of peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a kind of joy that isn't about getting what you want, a kind of aliveness that has nothing to do with excitement or stimulation or any of the things we usually chase after. I've watched people go through this transformation many times now. Sometimes it happens through suffering, through some crisis that breaks them open and forces them to see differently. Sometimes it happens through long, patient inner work. Sometimes it just happens for reasons I can't explain, like grace descending without being asked for. But however it happens, the result is similar. They become more themselves, more real, more present, less defended, less afraid, less concerned with what others think of them. And here's the strange thing, the paradox that nobody tells you about. When you stop trying to be successful in the conventional sense, when you stop chasing achievement and recognition and all the external markers of worth, you often become more successful. Not because you're trying to, but almost by accident. Because you're finally aligned with yourself, finally doing what you're actually meant to do instead of what you think you should do. Finally bringing your real gifts instead of performing some version of yourself that you think the world wants to see. The energy that was going into maintaining the mask, into defending the false self, into trying to be someone you're not, that energy gets freed up and it goes into your actual work, your actual life, your actual relationships. And people feel the difference. They might not be able to name it, but they feel it. There's something authentic there, something real, something that can't be faked or manufactured or learned from a book. I think maybe this is what success really means when you strip away all the cultural conditioning. Not having more than others, not being recognized or admired or envied, but being yourself so completely that there's no gap between who you are and who you pretend to be, living from your center instead of your periphery, giving what's actually yours to give instead of performing what you think is expected. And the beautiful thing, the really beautiful thing, is that this kind of success doesn't take anything away from anyone else. It's not competitive. There's no limited supply of authenticity that we all have to fight over. The more you become yourself, the more you actually help others become themselves too. Your presence gives them permission, shows them it's possible, creates a space where they can stop pretending and start being real. I've seen this happen in my work so many times. Someone comes to therapy wearing all these masks, playing all these roles, convinced that if they show their real self, nobody will accept them. And slowly, carefully, we create a space where they can take the masks off, where they can be angry or sad or confused or uncertain without being judged for it, where they can stop performing and just exist. And something happens in that space. Something shifts. They start to remember who they actually are underneath all the conditioning, and then they go back out into the world and they're different. Not better necessarily, not more impressive or successful by conventional measures, but more real, more solid, more there. And other people notice this, feel it. Sometimes it makes them uncomfortable because authenticity is threatening to people who are still hiding. But sometimes, often actually, it inspires them, makes them wonder if they could be that real too, if they could stop performing and start living. This is how consciousness spreads, I think. Not through preaching or teaching or trying to convince anyone of anything, but through presence, through example, through being so fully yourself that others start to wonder if they're allowed to be themselves too. It's contagious in a way that ideas never are, because it's not about believing something, it's about being something. And being is always more powerful than believing. So I suppose if there's any message in all this rambling, any point I'm trying to make, it's this: you don't need to become something other than what you are. You don't need to transcend your humanity or achieve some elevated state or become enlightened in the way spiritual traditions often describe it. You just need to wake up to what's actually here, to who you actually are, to what life is actually asking of you instead of what you think it should be asking. And that waking up, it's not a one-time event. It's not like you have some breakthrough and then you're done, permanently awakened forever. It's more like you wake up a little bit, then you fall back asleep, then you wake up again, maybe a little deeper this time. It's a process, a journey, a gradual becoming that probably continues until you die and maybe beyond, who knows. The habits I've described, they're just markers along that journey, signs that you're waking up, not goals to achieve or boxes to check, but natural expressions of consciousness that's becoming more aware of itself. And if you find yourself living this way, if you recognize these patterns in your own life, then you're probably further along than you think, because the awakened person often doesn't feel awakened. They just feel like themselves, more themselves than they've ever been maybe, but not special, not chosen, not superior to anyone else, just awake, just here, just alive to what's actually happening instead of lost in stories about what's happening. And really, that's enough, that's everything actually. To be here, fully here, in this moment, in this life, with all its beauty and terror and confusion and grace, to stop running from yourself and start meeting yourself, to stop performing for an imaginary audience and start living from your actual center, to become so completely who you are that there's no energy left for pretending to be anything else. This is what I've learned after all these years of working with the human psyche, all these decades of watching people struggle and suffer and occasionally break through into something truer, that we're all capable of waking up, we're all capable of living authentically, consciously, fully. It's our birthright, actually, our natural state. We're just so covered over with conditioning and fear and false identities that we've forgotten how. But the capacity is there, always there, waiting for us to remember, waiting for us to come home to ourselves. And when we do, when we finally stop running and start being, everything changes. Not the external circumstances necessarily, though sometimes those change too, but our relationship to those circumstances. Our capacity to meet life as it actually is, instead of demanding it be something else. Our ability to be ourselves completely, instead of performing some approved version of ourselves. And maybe that's what spiritual awakening really comes down to in the end. Not mystical experiences, or special states, or transcendent realizations. Just this, being fully human, fully yourself, fully alive to all of it, the light and the dark, the joy and the sorrow, the meaning and the mystery, living from your depths instead of your surface, trusting yourself instead of constantly looking outside for validation, becoming so completely who you are that there's nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove, nothing left to become. Just you, here, now, exactly as you are, which has always been enough, which has always been everything.